The old recipe card trembled in my hands, its yellowed edges soft from decades of use. But these weren't my grandmother's careful instructions. Someone had altered them, changed the measurements, added new ingredients. My mother's angular handwriting defaced the original, crossing out the essence of what made our family's maple butter tarts special. I'm Madeline, and until today, I thought I understood the rules of our family's power games. But this discovery in my mother's kitchen changed everything. Something wrong with the recipe? My mother's voice carried that familiar note of superiority as she arranged dessert plates on her pristine granite counter. You changed Grandma Rose's tarts. I held up the card, evidence of her betrayal. Why would you do that? She barely glanced at me, continuing her methodical arrangement. I improved them. The old recipe was too sweet, too provincial. We need to evolve with the times. The word provincial stung like an accusation. My grandmother had built our family's reputation on these recipes, on traditions my mother now dismissed as beneath her. Annie will be devastated, I said, knowing my sister had spent years perfecting the original recipe, desperate for our mother's approval. Your sister needs to understand that holding on to the past won't get her anywhere. My mother's diamond bracelet caught the light as she reached for the serving tray. Stephen agrees with me. We need to modernize our approach. Of course, Stephen agreed. Our family friend had been whispering in my mother's ear for years, encouraging every change that pushed us further from who we used to be. The doorbell chimed and voices filled the foyer. My father's quiet murmur, Annie's bright laugh, my husband Ethan's warm greeting. I tucked the recipe card into my pocket, a piece of evidence I wasn't ready to share. During dinner, I watched my mother serve her modified tarts with triumphant flourish. A new twist on an old favourite, she announced, her smile sharp as a blade. Annie took one bite and froze. Her eyes met mine across the table, recognition and hurt flooding her face. But before she could speak, Stephen jumped in with elaborate praise. Christine, you've outdone yourself, he gushed. Such sophistication. This is exactly what the family name needs. My father studied his plate in silence, another small surrender in a long history of looking away. Later, as I helped clean up, I found an envelope tucked behind the cookbook shelf. Inside was a letter from my grandmother to my mother dated just weeks before she died. The words hit me like a physical blow. Christine, I trust you to protect our family's heritage, not reshape it to match your ambitions. These recipes, these traditions, they're our story, our truth. Promise me you'll honour them. My mother had clearly made no such promise. Instead, she'd waited until my grandmother was gone, then started systematically erasing her influence, replacing authenticity with what she called refinement. Find anything interesting? My mother appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. I slipped the letter into my pocket alongside the recipe card, just remembering how things used to be. The past is overrated, dear. She took the cookbook from my hands and returned it to its shelf. I'm doing what's best for this family's future. But whose future? And at what cost? As I drove home that night, the letter and recipe card burning a hole in my pocket, I realized I had a choice to make. I could stay quiet, preserve the peace like my father, or I could fight for the truth my grandmother had tried to protect. My phone buzzed. A text from Annie. Did you see what she did to the tarts? I pulled into my driveway, making my decision. Some recipes weren't meant to be changed. Some truths needed to be preserved, no matter the cost. And my mother was about to learn that not everyone in this family would bow to her version of reality. Annie's culinary school acceptance letter lay crumpled on my mother's antique dining table, its prestigious letterhead barely visible beneath the creases. A cooking certificate? My mother's voice dripped with disdain. Really, Annie, I thought we discussed focusing on something more substantial. I watched my sister's shoulders tense as she stood her ground. It's not just any program. It's le cordon. It's a waste of your potential, my mother cut in, sliding the letter aside with one manicured finger. Stephen mentioned an opening at his consulting firm. That's the kind of opportunity you should be pursuing. Stephen, hovering near the china cabinet, nodded sagely. The business world would suit you, Annie. Your mother and I were just discussing your natural talent for organization. I gripped my water glass tighter, recognizing their practiced routine. Stephen always there to reinforce my mother's agenda, always ready with the perfect suggestion to redirect our lives according to her plan. I don't want to work in consulting, Annie said, her voice barely above a whisper. I want to honor Grandma's legacy. The recipes, the traditions. Those outdated recipes, my mother laughed, the sound brittle against the formal dining room walls. We've moved beyond that, dear. Times change. Families evolve. I couldn't stay silent any longer. Like how you evolved Grandma's maple butter tarts. The room went still. Stephen's expression sharpened with interest as my mother's eyes narrowed. Madeline, she warned, we've discussed this. But Annie was already pulling out her phone, fingers trembling as she pulled up a photo. Look what I found in Grandma's old storage unit yesterday. She slid the phone across the table. Her original recipe journal. The complete collection. Everything you said was lost. My mother's face paled slightly before she recovered. Those old things. I had them cleared out years ago. Clearly not everything, I said, watching her carefully. What else did you try to erase, Mother? Before she could answer, my father appeared in the doorway, looking more alert than I'd seen him in years. Ethan stood just behind him, his expression grave. Christine, my father said quietly, we need to talk. My mother's hand fluttered to her throat. Bradley, this isn't the time. It's exactly the time. My husband stepped forward, placing a folder on the table. I found these while helping clear out the old office files. Stephen moved closer, but my father blocked his path with a subtle shift. This is family business, Stephen. Perhaps you should go. For once, Stephen had no smooth response. He retreated with a backward glance at my mother, leaving her to face whatever truth lay in that folder alone. My father opened it slowly, revealing documents I couldn't quite see. I've kept quiet too long about what happened before your grandmother died. About the changes to her will, the missing heirlooms, the convenient timing of it all. Bradley. My mother's voice held a warning, but he continued. Our daughters deserve to know the truth about their inheritance. About why your mother really... Enough! She slammed her hand on the table, making the crystal water glasses jump. I protected this family. Everything I did was to secure our future, our reputation. By erasing our past. Annie's voice cracked. By making me feel like I was never good enough. I reached for my sister's hand under the table, feeling it tremble in mine. What's in those documents, Father? He began to answer, but a glint of metal caught my eye. Behind my mother's chair, partially visible through the glass cabinet doors, something golden reflected the afternoon light. Something I remembered from my childhood, something my mother had claimed was lost years ago. My grandmother's cherished locket, the one that supposedly disappeared the week before she died. The one that, according to family legend, contained a secret that could change everything. My mother followed my gaze, and for the first time in my life, I saw real fear cross her face. Madeline, she said softly, all pretense gone from her voice. Some secrets need to stay buried. But as I stood to reach for the cabinet door, I knew we were well past keeping secrets. It was time for the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. The golden locket lay heavy in my palm as my father's confession filled his study. Each word stripped away another layer of our family's carefully maintained facade. Your mother and Stephen orchestrated everything during those final weeks, he said, his voice rough with regret. I knew what they were doing, but I was too much of a coward to stop them. What exactly did they do? I traced the locket's intricate engravings, remembering how my grandmother used to let me hold it while she told stories of our family's history. They convinced your grandmother she was losing her mind, moved things around, hid important documents, changed dates in her calendar. He poured himself another whiskey, hand trembling. Stephen would visit, plant seeds of doubt about her memory. Then your mother would swoop in, offering to help. Manage everything. The study door creaked open and Annie slipped in, her face pale. I just got off the phone with Grandma's old nurse. She confirmed it. Mother and Stephen were controlling who could visit, what information got through. And you just watched it happen. I couldn't keep the accusation from my voice as I turned to our father. He met my gaze, then looked away. They had leverage. A mistake I made years ago that could have destroyed us all. Stephen knew about it somehow. What mistake? The original family business wasn't as legitimate as everyone believes. I made some choices. Choices that Stephen threatened to expose, unless I played along with their plan. Annie sank into the leather armchair, her culinary school acceptance letter still clutched in her hand. So everything, the changed recipes, the missing heirlooms, Grandma's revised will, it was all built on lies? Your mother believes she's protecting our legacy, our father said. In her mind, the end justifies any means. I opened the locket, expecting to find the familiar family photo. Instead, a tiny key fell into my hand. That's it, our father whispered. The key to the truth. Your grandmother told me about it the night before. Before everything changed. There's a safety deposit box at First National. Stephen and your mother never knew about it. The study door burst open. My mother stood there, Stephen at her shoulder like a dark shadow. I should have known you'd break eventually, Bradley. My mother's voice could have frozen flame. After everything I've done to protect this family, to protect your secrets, you didn't protect anything, I cut in. You destroyed what made our family special. You twisted Grandma's legacy into something she would have hated. I made it better, she hissed. Stronger, more sophisticated. And I won't let you tear it apart with ancient history and sentimental nonsense. Stephen stepped forward, his usual smooth manner replaced by something harder. Think carefully about your next move, Madeline. Some truths are better left buried. For everyone's sake. But Annie stood up, her shoulders straight. I'm done being buried. Done letting you decide what's best for me, for all of us. She turned to me. We need to get to that safety deposit box. You'll be cut off, our mother warned. Both of you. Everything I've built. Everything I've achieved. You mean everything you've stolen? I closed my fist around the key. Everything you manipulated and lied for? Bradley, Stephen's voice carried a warning. Remember what's at stake. Our father stood, and for the first time in years I saw strength in his stance. No more threats, Stephen. No more secrets. He moved to stand between us and them. My daughters deserve the truth, whatever it costs me. My mother's mask cracked, real fear showing through. You can't. The consequences will be what they will be, I said, taking Annie's hand. But we're done living your version of our family's story. As we left the study, Annie squeezed my hand. I've been offered a position at a culinary school in Paris, she whispered. I was afraid to tell anyone, but now, maybe it's time to break free completely. The key pressed into my palm, a small metal promise of revelations to come. Tomorrow we would open that safety deposit box, unleash whatever truths our grandmother had protected. But tonight, watching my sister's newfound courage, I realized some family bonds were strengthening even as others crumbled. Behind us, I heard my mother's sharp voice rise in argument with our father, but for once, her words held no power over me. We had our own legacy to reclaim now, one truth at a time. Ruby pushed her untouched coffee aside and stared at me across her kitchen table. You realize your mother won't just roll over and accept defeat, right? She'll strike back harder. I placed my grandmother's locket between us, its golden surface catching the morning light. What choice do I have? The safety deposit box could destroy everything, Ruby cut in, including Annie's chance at a fresh start in Paris. She tapped her fingers on the table. Maybe there's a smarter way to handle this. What do you mean? Your mother's power comes from controlling the narrative, so change it. Use her own tactics against her. Ruby's expression hardened. Give Annie the spotlight she deserves, but do it publicly where your mother can't interfere. The idea felt wrong, yet familiar, like looking into a warped mirror of my mother's methods. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Need to talk. Found something in the old company files. Come home now. I found my husband in his home office, surrounded by scattered papers. His face was ashen. Remember those missing insurance documents from your grandmother's estate? He held up a folder. They weren't missing. They were hidden. Your mother and Stephen created a separate trust account 3 days before your grandmother died. My throat tightened. How much? Enough to fund Stephen's consulting firm, the one he keeps trying to push Annie into. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. There's more. Your father's signature is on these papers, but the dates don't match. They're forged. A knock at the front door interrupted us. Annie burst in, clutching her phone. The culinary school rescinded my acceptance. Someone sent them an email claiming I plagiarized recipes for my application portfolio. The pieces clicked together. Mother. Stephen delivered the news personally. Annie's voice cracked. He offered me that consulting position again, said it was my best option now. I thought of Ruby's suggestion about using my mother's tactics. The idea didn't feel so wrong anymore. What's in the safety deposit box? Ethan asked quietly. I don't know, but we're finding out today. I grabbed my car keys, then stopped. Annie, call the local paper. The one Mother hates. Tell them you're hosting a traditional cooking demonstration next week. Say you're honoring Grandmother's legacy. Annie's eyes widened. Mother will be furious. Exactly. She'll be so focused on stopping that she won't see us accessing the safety deposit box. I'll keep digging through these files, Ethan said. There has to be more evidence of what they did. At the bank, Annie's hands shook as I inserted the key. Inside the box lay a single envelope and a small leather diary. The envelope contained photos, our mother and Stephen at a hotel, dates stamped from the week before our grandmother died. But it was the diary that made my blood run cold. Our grandmother's last entries detailed everything: the manipulation, the gaslighting, the systematic dismantling of her control over her own life. She'd known what they were doing, had documented it all, while pretending to succumb to their influence. The final page held a letter addressed to me. Madeline, if you're reading this, they succeeded in silencing me, but they didn't win. The real estate trust, the one Christine claims I dissolved, it's still active, hidden under a different name. All the properties, the true family recipes, everything. It's protected. The account details are encoded in the family photos you used to love studying with me. Remember how I taught you to look for patterns? A heavy thud made us jump. Stephen stood in the doorway, his usual smooth demeanor replaced by barely controlled rage. Your mother warned you about digging into the past, he said. Now you've forced our hand. Annie clutched the diary to her chest. What are you going to do? Destroy more of our lives? On the contrary, he pulled out his phone. Bradley, it's time. Tell Christine to execute Plan B. As he turned to leave, a manila envelope slid under the bank's side door. My name was written across the front in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a single document, a trust agreement I'd never seen before, with Stephen's signature next to a sum that made my heart stop. The game had just changed, but I wasn't sure anymore who was really playing whom. The family photos spread across my dining room table like a mosaic of lies. Each image held a piece of my grandmother's code, numbers and letters hidden in background details, dates that didn't quite match reality. Beside them lay Stephen's trust agreement, its implications too massive to ignore. He's been embezzling from the family trust, Ethan said, pointing to the document, using your mother's influence to cover his tracks. Annie paced behind us, her cooking demonstration flyer clutched in her hands. The newspaper's running the story tomorrow. Mother's already called 3 times, threatening legal action. Let her. I traced the pattern in one of the photos, a seemingly casual arrangement of books that held account numbers. She can't stop us now. The doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw my father standing alone on the porch, his shoulders heavy with resignation. Your mother knows about the safety deposit box, he said as soon as I opened the door. Stephen's already moving funds offshore. Whatever you're planning, you need to do it now. Why should we trust you? Annie's voice cracked. You helped them destroy Grandma's legacy. He pulled out an old envelope. Because I kept copies of everything, every document they forged, every account they manipulated. I was a coward, but I wasn't completely blind. My phone buzzed. Ruby sending a warning. Christine just left my house. She's coming your way, and she knows about the encoded photos. We need to call an emergency family meeting, I said, gathering the evidence. Tonight, before they can hide anything else. She won't come, my father warned. She will if you tell her you're ready to confess everything publicly. I met his gaze. Are you? 2 hours later, we sat around my mother's formal dining room table, the same place where this had all started with a modified recipe. The evidence lay before us. Photos, documents, my grandmother's diary, Stephen's trust agreement. My mother's face remained impassive as I laid out each piece. Only her fingers, drumming steadily on the mahogany surface, betrayed her agitation. So, she said finally, you've appointed yourself judge and jury of this family's choices. Choice? Annie stood, her voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. You mean like choosing to sabotage my culinary school acceptance or choosing to steal Grandma's legacy? I protected this family's future, our mother snapped. Everything I did was for yourself, I cut in, sliding forward the hotel photos of her and Stephen. Including this? Colour drained from her face as she recognized the images. Stephen moved to speak, but my father's voice cut through the tension. I have already sent copies to the family lawyer, he said quietly, along with evidence of the embezzlement. Stephen's composure cracked. You sanctimonious old fool. You think exposing this will hurt just me? Your own criminal past is nothing compared to what you two did. My father stood, addressing our mother. Christine, it's over. The truth about Mother's will, the trust fund, all of it. It comes out now, or I go to the authorities myself. Our mother's laugh held no humour. You're bluffing. You never had the spine. I opened my grandmother's diary to the final entry. Read it. Read how she knew exactly what you were doing to her, how she protected the real estate trust from you both. What real estate trust? Stephen demanded. Annie smiled for the first time in days. The one that still owns all the properties. The one Grandma left to us, hidden in plain sight. Our mother's hand shot out, reaching for the diary, but I pulled it back. Touch it and I call the newspaper right now. I'm sure they'd love to run this story alongside Annie's cooking demonstration. You wouldn't dare destroy this family's reputation, she hissed. No, Mother. You already did that. I stood, gathering the evidence. You have until morning to decide. Resign from all family business dealings and support Annie's culinary career. Or we expose everything. As we left, Stephen's angry voice followed us. This isn't over. But looking at Annie's determined face and my father's newfound strength, I knew it was. The only question was how much damage our mother would cause before accepting her defeat. My phone buzzed again. An anonymous email containing one line. Check the foundation of the old summer house. The game wasn't over yet. It was just moving to a new playing field. The summer house's foundation crumbled beneath our flashlight beams, decades of secrets hidden in its shadows. Annie held the light steady while I pried loose a brick, revealing a metal lockbox wedged deep within the wall. Should we open it here? Annie whispered. Before I could answer, floodlights blazed to life, blinding us. Stephen's voice cut through the darkness. I believe that belongs to your mother. He wasn't alone. 2 men in suits flanked him, their expressions professionally blank. Behind them, our mother emerged from the shadows. Did you really think I wouldn't protect my interests? She gestured to the men. Corporate security. They're here to recover stolen company property. Stolen? I clutched the lockbox tighter. Like how you stole Grandma's legacy. Your grandmother was losing her grip on reality. Our mother's voice hardened. I did what was necessary, just like I'm doing now. One of the men stepped forward. Hand over the box, or we'll be forced to involve the authorities. Go ahead, Annie challenged. We'll tell them everything. Stephen smiled. Including how your father's past indiscretions led to an innocent man's death. That's what's in that box. Proof of Bradley's greatest shame. Your mother protected him, protected all of you, by burying it here. The lockbox suddenly felt heavier. You're lying. Am I? Our mother moved closer. Why do you think your father kept quiet all these years? Ask him about the night of the accident. Ask him whose body they never found. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Don't give them anything. Ruby found something. Coming now. But Stephen was already reaching for the box. Your choice, Madeline. Surrender it, or watch your father go to prison. Annie grabbed my arm. They're bluffing. They have to be. The sound of tires on gravel cut through the tension. Headlights swept across us as Ethan's car approached, but another vehicle blocked its path. A police cruiser. I warned you there would be consequences, our mother said softly. The police have some questions about certain missing financial documents. Documents last seen in your possession. My heart sank as I realized her plan. She'd reported us for theft, turning our evidence against her into a weapon. It's over, girls. Stephen reached for the box again. Don't make this worse than it needs to be. The police officer approached, hand resting on his belt. We received a report of trespassing and theft. No, Annie's voice cracked. You don't understand. They're the ones who own this property. Our mother cut in smoothly. I have the deed, right here. But something in her voice caught my attention. A slight tremor, barely noticeable. She was lying about the deed. The property was part of the hidden real estate trust. The officer reached for the lockbox. I'll need to take that as evidence. In that moment, I made a choice. I dropped the box, letting it shatter against the foundation stones, papers scattered everywhere, caught in the wind and darkness. No! Stephen lunged forward, scrambling to gather the flying documents. Our mother's composure cracked as she dove for the papers, revealing her desperation. The officer's attention shifted, watching their frantic attempts to collect specific documents while ignoring others. Interesting priorities for supposedly stolen property. Ethan's voice came from behind us. He stood with Ruby, both recording everything on their phones. But our small victory felt hollow as I spotted one particular document among the scattered papers. A newspaper clipping about a fatal accident from 30 years ago, with our father's name prominently featured. My mother met my eyes, her expression both triumphant and wounded. Still think you're protecting the family legacy? Some secrets exist for a reason, Madeline. Some truths destroy everything they touch. As police lights flashed across the summer house's weathered walls, I realized we'd reached a point of no return. We'd exposed our mother's deceptions, but at what cost? The real truth about our father lay scattered in the darkness, waiting to either save or destroy us all. My phone buzzed again, an unknown number this time. The message contained just 4 words. I saw the accident. The anonymous witness's statement lay on my mother's polished desk like a live grenade. Beside it, Ruby's forensic analysis of the accident scene photos revealed what really happened that night, and who was actually behind the wheel. It wasn't Dad at all, was it? I kept my voice steady as my mother paced her study. It was Stephen. You have no idea what you're talking about. But her fingers trembled as she reached for her ever-present glass of wine. The witness remembers everything. How Stephen was driving, how you helped cover it up. I placed the old newspaper clipping next to the statement. You let Dad take the blame, then used his guilt to control him for decades. The study door opened. Stephen entered, his usual smoothness replaced by barely contained panic. The board members are calling. Someone leaked documents about the embezzlement. That would be me. Annie stepped in behind him, holding up her phone. Every transaction, every manipulated account, all sent to the ethics committee 20 minutes ago. Our mother's glass shattered against her desk. You ungrateful... Save it, I cut in. We also found Grandma's original will, the one you destroyed and replaced. She left everything to Annie and me, with Dad as executor. Not you, never you. Everything I did was to protect this family. She whirled on Stephen. Tell them why we had to take control. But Stephen was already backing toward the door. Christine, I think it's time we... Don't you dare. Her voice could have frozen flame. After everything I've done for you, everything I covered up. Like the real estate fraud? My father's voice made us all turn. He stood in the doorway, holding a familiar metal box. A second lockbox from the summer house. Or should we discuss the offshore accounts? Stephen lunged for the box, but Ethan stepped out from behind my father, blocking his path. The police are very interested in those accounts, Stephen, especially the ones tied to known criminal enterprises. You're bluffing, our mother whispered, but her face had gone pale. I pulled out my grandmother's locket, opening it to reveal a tiny USB drive. Everything's here. Every transaction, every cover-up, every lie. Grandma knew what you were planning. She left us the breadcrumbs to find the truth. You can't prove any of this, Stephen snarled, but his eyes darted between the exits like a trapped animal. Annie moved to block the doorway. The witness is waiting at the police station right now, ready to tell them exactly what happened the night of the accident. Our mother's composure finally shattered. I protected you, she pointed at our father. I saved you from prison, saved this family from disgrace. No, he said quietly. You used my shame to build your own power, but I'm done being your puppet. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. It's over, Mother. I placed my hand on the locket. Grandma's real legacy ends here, with the truth. Stephen made a break for the side door, but Ruby appeared, blocking his escape. Going somewhere. The police would love to hear about those offshore accounts. Our mother sank into her chair, decades of careful control crumbling around her. You'll destroy everything. The family name, our reputation. No. Annie stepped forward, her voice strong. We're reclaiming it, starting with this. She pulled out a familiar recipe card. The original maple butter tart recipe, unaltered and pure. The study doors burst open as police officers entered, warrant in hand. As they read Stephen his rights, our mother stared at us with a mixture of fury and disbelief. You really think you've won? Her whisper carried across the chaos. Some secrets should stay buried. Some truths will haunt you forever. Maybe, I agreed, watching as the officers led Stephen away. But we're done living in the shadow of your lies. As the police began their search of the study, Annie squeezed my hand. Through the window, camera flashes lit up the driveway. Tomorrow's headlines already writing themselves. Our mother's carefully constructed empire was crumbling, but something stronger was rising from its ashes. Something built on truth, not manipulation. On love, not control. The cost had been high, but as I held my grandmother's locket, I knew we'd finally honoured her real legacy. Not the one our mother had tried to create, but the one written in recipes, sealed in letters, and preserved in the hearts of those who remembered what family really meant. The maple butter tarts filled my grandmother's kitchen with their familiar sweetness as Annie pulled another batch from the oven. Through the window, reporters still lingered at the property gate, hungry for more details about Stephen's arrest and our mother's public disgrace. Perfect golden brown, Annie said, setting the tarts beside a stack of newspapers. Their headlines screamed of financial scandal and decades-old cover-ups, but we'd protected our father from the worst revelations. Some truths were ours to keep. Grandma would be proud, I said, touching the locket now permanently around my neck. Not just of the tarts. The kitchen door creaked open. Our father entered, looking lighter somehow, despite everything. The estate lawyers finished reviewing the original will. Everything's being transferred back to you girls, just as your grandmother intended. And Mother. Annie's voice held more curiosity than bitterness now. Accepting a quiet retirement abroad. He picked up one of the newspapers. She'll have enough to live on, but her days of control are over. Ruby appeared in the doorway, waving a thick envelope. The Culinary School Board reviewed Annie's case. They're not just reinstating your acceptance. They want you to teach a heritage cooking course. Annie's eyes filled with tears as she read the letter. In Paris? And they want your grandmother's recipes included in the curriculum, Ruby added with a smile. I touched the recipe card on the counter, its edges soft with age and use. They belong to everyone now. No more hiding them away. Speaking of no more hiding, our father pulled out an old photo album. I found this in the summer house foundation. Your grandmother left it there, along with this. He handed me a sealed envelope, my name written in her familiar script. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Dearest Madeline, if you're reading this, you've discovered the truth. But remember, legacy isn't just about exposing lies. It's about choosing which truths to preserve, which recipes to pass on. Some ingredients are better left unmeasured. Love, Grandma. The doorbell rang. Ethan entered with a stack of documents. The board approved everything. The family foundation is being restructured, with both of you as trustees. And the summer house? Annie asked. Being converted into a cooking school, I said, where students can learn the real traditions, the authentic recipes. Our father touched the recipe card gently. Your mother wasn't entirely wrong, you know. Some things do need to evolve, but not at the cost of their soul. A noise from the driveway drew us to the window. Our mother stood at the gate, ignoring the reporters as she stared up at the house. For a moment, I saw something in her face, not regret exactly, but recognition of what she'd lost, what she'd traded for power. She placed something on the gatepost, a small wrapped package, then walked away without looking back. Later, we found it contained her own grandmother's recipe book, filled with notes and variations we'd never seen. On the final page, she'd written, "Some legacies deserve to survive, even if their keepers don't." Annie began copying the recipe for tomorrow's paper, her new weekly column celebrating family cooking traditions. But she paused, looking up at me. Do you think we'll ever understand why she did it all? Maybe that's not the point, I said, watching the sunset paint the kitchen in familiar golden hues. Maybe it's about understanding ourselves. The oven timer chimed. As Annie pulled out the final batch of tarts, their scent filled the kitchen with memories, not just of our grandmother, but of all the complicated ingredients that made up our family's story. I picked up one of the tarts, still warm. Its surface wasn't perfect like our mother had always demanded. Instead, it was beautifully, authentically imperfect, like truth, like family, like love. The recipe card sat between us, its measurements both precise and forgiving. Some traditions didn't need to be changed. They just needed to be understood, preserved not in spite of their flaws, but because of them. Outside, the reporters finally began to leave, but we stayed in the kitchen, surrounded by the sweet evidence of our grandmother's real legacy, not the one written in wills or locked in boxes, but the one baked into every moment we chose truth over power, love over control, forgiveness over perfection.